What if the most damaging power struggle in modern sports history never happened on a basketball court? What if it happened in a glass-walled conference room, behind locked doors with microphones that weren't supposed to be on? The WNBA just finished its most explosive season on record. Record-breaking viewership, sold-out arenas, billion-dollar media rights deals that had corporate boardrooms popping champagne. But underneath all that glittering success, something was rotting. A war was quietly being fought between the suits writing the checks and the athletes actually earning them. And when rumors of a leaked audio recording began spreading through front offices and journalist inboxes, everything that league executives had worked desperately to keep hidden started spilling into the open. The names at the center of this storm, head coach Stephanie White and star defender Dejonai Carrington, aren't just sports figures anymore. They've become symbols of a much bigger battle. A battle over who actually controls professional women's basketball and what happens to the people brave enough to find out. To understand how things got this explosive, you have to understand what the WNBA looked like just before the money arrived. For most of its existence, the league operated quietly. Passionate fan bases, dedicated athletes, and a media landscape that largely ignored them unless a controversy forced coverage. Players earned modest salaries, traveled commercial, and fought for every scrap of mainstream recognition while putting out a product that deserved far more attention than it got. The league's survival wasn't built on corporate investment. It was built on grit, authenticity, and athletes who played with a chip on their shoulder because the world consistently underestimated them. That identity, raw, unpolished, and completely real, was the foundation everything else stood on. Then the money came, and it changed absolutely everything overnight. The ratings surge didn't just bring new viewers, it brought an entirely different category of stakeholder into the building. Billionaire investors, major television conglomerates, Fortune 500 sponsors, entities that had zero emotional connection to the sport's history or culture, but a massive financial interest in controlling its future. Suddenly, every press conference, every on-court collision, and every post-game interview carried a dollar value attached to it. League executives found themselves managing something they hadn't been prepared for, a product that was simultaneously becoming more valuable and more volatile by the week. Corporate partners started sending notes, sponsors started raising concerns, and the executives caught in the middle began applying quiet, steady pressure on franchises to smooth out anything that might make a boardroom uncomfortable. The sport that survived on authenticity was now being asked to trade that authenticity for a polished, sanitized television package, and not everyone was willing to make that trade. The Connecticut Sun had built their entire identity on exactly the kind of basketball that corporate television producers hated. Suffocating defensive pressure, physical, grinding matchups, low-scoring tactical battles that required you to actually understand the game to appreciate them. No flashy ISO scoring sequences that could be clipped into a 15-second social media post. No theatrical celebrations designed for the highlight reel. Just hard, disciplined, winning basketball that made opponents genuinely miserable to compete against. Leading that operation was Stephanie White, a woman who understood the sport from angles most coaches never get to experience. As a former elite player, a decorated head coach, and a sharp television analyst, White had spent years watching how the league packaged itself for public consumption. She knew exactly what executives wanted. She simply refused to give them to it at the expense of her team's competitive identity. When the league's marketing machine began pushing hard for faster, higher-scoring, more aesthetically pleasing content, White kept running her defensive masterclasses without apology. And when her players were criticized by talking heads who preferred highlight reel basketball, she walked to the podium and publicly defended them every single time. That kind of defiance, quiet but completely consistent, put her directly in the crosshairs of an executive class that wasn't used to being ignored. While White was holding the line on the sideline, Dejonai Carrington was detonating something far louder on the floor and everywhere beyond it. Her breakout season was statistically remarkable, career highs across the board, a Most Improved Player award that nobody could seriously argue against.
But the numbers weren't what made Carrington dangerous in the eyes of league management. What made her dangerous was that she absolutely refused to perform the kind of quiet professionalism that corporate sponsors demanded from athletes. When hyped rookie prospects stepped onto the floor surrounded by media fanfare and carefully constructed narratives, Dejonai Carrington guarded them like her livelihood depended on it, because it did, without the slightest regard for their marketing value or their follower count. When she felt that media coverage was unfair, she said so publicly. When she believed certain players were being elevated by promotional machines while others were systematically ignored, she named the dynamic out loud. No softening, no careful PR phrasing, no diplomatic deflection. Just exactly what she thought, delivered directly, with zero patience for the kind of carefully managed messaging that makes executives sleep comfortably at night. Fans who valued realness adored her for it. League offices and corporate partners found themselves doing damage control after every interview she gave.
The tension that had been quietly building for months finally started cracking through the surface during a series of high-profile matchups where Carrington's aggressive defensive style became the center of a media firestorm. Incidents that would have been treated as routine physical basketball in any previous era were suddenly being dissected under the magnifying glass of a national television audience tuning in for the first time. Panel shows ran segment after segment, questioning intent, debating whether the play was too rough, whether the league needed to intervene. Social media algorithms took every frame and amplified it to audiences who had never watched a full basketball game in their lives, but had very strong opinions about what they'd just seen clipped into a 30-second video. Instead of letting the noise settle, Stephanie White stepped directly into it. Post-game press conference after post-game press conference, she made clear that her team would not apologize for playing hard, physical, competitive basketball. She was not going to discipline her players for doing exactly what they were supposed to do, and she was not going to soften her team's identity to make casual viewers more comfortable. For the executives watching from their suites, this wasn't just stubbornness, it was a direct challenge to their ability to manage the narrative they were being paid enormous amounts of money to control. Behind closed doors, the response was immediate, and it wasn't subtle. Reports began surfacing from people inside league circles that high-level phone calls were flooding in between executive offices and team ownership groups. League representatives were allegedly urging franchises to get control of their personnel before valuable corporate relationships started taking damage. And then, the rumor that changed everything started spreading. According to whispers moving rapidly through basketball journalism circles and team insider networks, a confidential high-level meeting had taken place, the kind of meeting where decisions get made that never appear in any official memo. Allegedly, that meeting didn't stay calm. It turned into a heated, chaotic confrontation involving executive administrators, coaching representatives, and player leadership, with arguments erupting over officiating consistency, media treatment bias, and the aggressive corporate policing of athlete personalities. And somewhere in that room, reportedly, a recording was made. The alleged contents of that audio reportedly included senior administrators openly discussing specific administrative mechanisms they could quietly deploy against coaches and players who were creating friction. The language allegedly used wasn't the sanitized corporate speak of official press releases. It was operational, specific, the kind of conversation that would horrify players, fans, and sponsors equally if it ever reached the public in full. The league office never confirmed the recording existed, but something shifted almost immediately after the rumors started spreading, and the shift was impossible to miss if you were paying attention. Post-game press availability became noticeably more structured. Certain athletes who had been fixtures in league-produced content began appearing less frequently. The warm, accessible media environment that had helped drive the ratings boom started feeling measurably colder. Players noticed, journalists noticed, fans paying close attention noticed, and the cumulative effect of all those subtle changes was louder than any official statement could have been.
Because when an organization starts moving carefully in the exact ways the rumor suggested it might, the rumor starts feeling considerably less speculation. Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, who had been brought into the league specifically for her corporate executive expertise and had delivered genuinely impressive results in terms of financial growth and media deal structures, found herself under a level of scrutiny that her previous career had not prepared for. Handling a Fortune 500 restructuring and managing the volatile intersection of elite athletes, social media algorithms, and billion-dollar sponsorships are entirely different disciplines. Player leadership made clear they felt the commissioner's priorities were fundamentally misaligned with the people whose labor generated all the revenue she was being credited for growing. The trust between the executive floor and the locker rooms wasn't strained, it was gone.
The breaking point came in the form of a decision that stopped the sports world cold. Stephanie White resigned as head coach of the Connecticut Sun. The woman who had built one of the most disciplined, winning cultures in recent franchise history, who had publicly gone to war for her players at considerable professional risk, walked away. The sports world barely had time to absorb that shock before the next piece landed. Within days, White was named the new head coach of the Indiana Fever, the franchise sitting at the absolute red-hot center of the league's commercial explosion, the most financially vital roster in the sport, the team most directly connected to the marketing boom that had triggered the entire crisis. Speculation ignited instantly. Was this White voluntarily escaping a toxic administrative environment in Connecticut? Was she strategically repositioned by power brokers who wanted her tactical brilliance pointed at a more commercially cooperative situation? Did she make a calculated decision to move toward the spotlight rather than continue fighting a shadow war from the margins? Nobody outside the relevant phone calls knows for certain, but the timing, the destination, and the speed of it all made the move feel like anything but coincidence. And for the players she left behind in Connecticut, particularly Dejonai Carrington, the departure felt like the floor disappearing beneath their feet. Carrington's response played out the way her responses always do, publicly, sharply, and with just enough deliberate ambiguity to ensure that everyone understood exactly what she meant without giving anyone a clean quote to use against her. A series of social media posts that read like encrypted messages to anyone familiar with the situation made her feelings unmistakably clear. She felt the ground had shifted under her without warning. She felt the people who were supposed to have her back had been repositioned by forces that didn't particularly care about her career trajectory. And then came the part that genuinely alarmed people who understood how leagues operate. Rumors began circulating that Carrington herself was the subject of a quiet, systematic campaign of institutional discouragement from the league level. Not a formal suspension, not an official fine that would generate headlines, something far harder to fight and far more damaging to a career in the long run. In professional sports, they call it a shadow ban, and for an athlete in the prime of her career, it's one of the most brutal things that can happen to you, precisely because there's no official record of it happening at all. The mechanics of a shadow ban in professional sports are worth understanding because they reveal just how much power league offices actually hold over individual careers without ever having to answer for how they use it. It doesn't come with a press release. There's no suspension letter, no formal hearing, no appeal process. Instead, an athlete simply starts disappearing from the promotional ecosystem that generates supplemental income and public visibility. The jersey stops appearing in official marketing campaigns. The feature package that was being discussed quietly gets shelved. The commercial integration opportunity that seemed like it was moving forward stops moving. The social media posts from official league accounts start featuring everyone except that particular player. Refereeing crews start calling the game a certain way whenever that player is involved. None of it is provable as a coordinated policy. all of it is devastating in aggregate. For Carrington, fans began noticing the pattern almost simultaneously. Despite her statistics being genuinely impressive, despite her award hardware being real and undeniable, she was becoming strangely invisible in the promotional materials of a league she was actively helping to grow. The message being broadcast across the league was brutally simple. Challenge the corporate agenda and watch your career opportunities quietly close around you. No drama, no confrontation, just silence and the slow professional suffocation that comes with it.
What makes this entire situation seismic beyond the individual stories of White and Carrington is what it represents for the Women's National Basketball Players Association heading into what promises to be the most consequential labor negotiation in the organization's history. For years, WNBA labor talks centered on the obvious and legitimate material issues: salary structures, travel conditions, revenue sharing percentages, practice facility quality. Those fights were real and important. But the current crisis has forced player leadership to recognize that the battle has evolved into something more fundamental. If a head coach with Stephanie White's resume and reputation can be pushed out of a situation by administrative pressure, and if a player with Dejonai Carrington's talent and award credentials can be quietly erased from promotional materials for refusing to perform corporate-approved personality management, then no player in the league is actually safe. The alleged existence of recorded conversations in which executive-level administrators openly discussed mechanisms for silencing outspoken athletes has become a galvanizing force across rosters that previously had very different agendas. Veterans who disagreed about almost everything else are finding common ground around a single terrifying realization. The system they're operating inside is not neutral, it is actively managed, and it will move against them if they step too far out of line. The upcoming labor talks are expected to include demands for structural protections that have never previously been on the table, formal limits on executive interference in player media access, clear procedural safeguards against arbitrary disciplinary action, and independent oversight mechanisms that could actually hold league administrators accountable for the kind of behavior the alleged recording describes. The media landscape surrounding all of this deserves its own honest examination, because it is simultaneously a victim of this dynamic and one of its primary engines. Digital platforms were built on conflict. Their algorithms were designed, whether intentionally or not, to amplify outrage and suppress nuance, because outrage generates clicks and nuance generates nothing. Every time Carrington made a defensive play that could be framed as controversial, every time White delivered a press conference quote that could be packaged as defiant, the content machine swallowed it and multiplied it to audiences who had zero context for what they were watching. Television panel shows that needed daily content turned routine basketball incidents into culture war flashpoints. Sports commentators who understood the game well enough to provide meaningful analysis were regularly drowned out by louder voices who understood that performance and provocation generated more engagement than accuracy ever could. The league, terrified by how quickly online narratives could spiral into sponsor-threatening territory, responded with exactly the wrong instinct: heavy-handed corporate suppression that made every restricted press conference and every mysteriously absent promotional package feel like confirmation of the worst accusations being made against them. By trying to forcibly manage the story, they accidentally turned a manageable controversy into an institutional scandal. The irony sits at the center of the entire crisis. The league became financially valuable because its athletes were real, complicated, passionate human beings who played with visible emotion and spoke with unfiltered honesty. The moment the money arrived and executives tried to replace that realness with a manufactured corporate product, they started destroying the exact thing that made the investment worthwhile in the first place. As the next season approaches,
Three figures will define the story in ways that go far beyond wins, losses, and playoff brackets. Stephanie White will step onto an Indiana Fever sideline, operating under a level of scrutiny she has never previously experienced. Every strategic decision she makes, every relationship she builds or fails to build within that franchise, every interaction with a league office that has a complicated history with her approach will be watched, analyzed, and interpreted through the lens of everything that has already happened. The question hanging over her isn't whether she's a good enough coach. That debate was settled long ago. The question is whether an executive infrastructure that allegedly struggled with her independence in Connecticut will find her any more manageable in Indianapolis, or whether the pressure simply follows her across state lines wearing a different uniform. Dejonai Carrington heads into the season at a crossroads that no athlete should be forced to face. She can continue playing with the fearless, uncompromising energy that made her extraordinary and potentially face continued institutional discouragement that limits her commercial opportunities and her professional future. Or she can recalibrate, soften her public voice, and give the league the performance of corporate compliance it has allegedly been demanding, trading authenticity for access in a way that would fundamentally change who she is as an athlete and a public figure. Neither option should feel like the only two choices available to someone of her talent and her importance to the sport. The fact that it does tells you everything you need to know about the environment she's navigating. And Commissioner Cathy Engelbert faces a challenge that her corporate background may have genuinely not prepared her for. Rebuilding trust with athletes who believe they have documented evidence that executive leadership discussed suppressing them isn't a communications problem. It isn't a public relations crisis that a strategic press release can resolve. It is a fundamental structural problem that requires either genuine systemic reform or a decision to double down on corporate control and accept the consequences of what that fight will look like when players arrive at the negotiating table with everything they currently know and feel. Every whistle blown next season will mean something it didn't mean before. Every roster move, every refereeing pattern, every player who appears or mysteriously disappears from official promotional materials will be watched by fans who now understand what those signals might mean. The game itself, the basketball, the competition, the athleticism that made all of this investment worthwhile in the first place, risks being buried under the weight of a corporate war that the people running the league created by trying too hard to control something that was never fully theirs to control. What the WNBA built its reputation on was never sanitizable. It was never packageable into a clean, controversy-free corporate product. Its value came from the fact that the people playing it and coaching it were genuinely, completely real in a sports media landscape full of carefully managed images and manufactured personalities. That authenticity cannot be administered out of athletes through promotional blackouts and refereeing pressure and closed-door conversations about administrative levers. It can only be driven underground, where it builds pressure until it finds a way out. And if the alleged recording and everything that followed it are an indication of where the pressure currently sits, the eruption that's been building has not yet fully arrived. The battle for the soul of women's basketball is not over. It may not even be close to over. But one thing is no longer in any serious dispute. The athletes know what they're fighting. The fans know what to watch for. And the era of quiet backroom control, where executives could shape careers and suppress voices without consequence, is finished. There is no version of this story where things go back to the way they were. The only question left is what comes next and who will be brave enough to build it.